Okay, great. Let's get started just because we have a lot of content to go through. So welcome everyone to the Stacking Up Success webinar, an introduction to the art of brownfield redevelopment funding. This webinar will be recording and the recording will be available on our website and in a follow-up email within the next week. For any questions that you may have throughout this webinar, please use the Q&A box. Any comments, or if something really resonated with you, just please put them in the chat box. That will help us during the Q&A portion, which will be during the last 15 minutes of the webinar. So to introduce myself, my name is Lujane Altawara, and I am a program associate at the Center for Creative Land Recycling, or CCLR. CCLR is hosting this webinar in partnership with San Diego State University, Eden Housing, Satellite Affordable Housing Associates, and Active San Gabriel Valley. Our speakers for today are Tamar Sanders, Leslie Palaron, David Diaz, and Doctors Jessica Barlow and Madison Swain. And I mentioned earlier that I launched a poll, so I'm just going to end the poll now and share the results. So we have a pretty diverse group with us today, a couple of people from the state or federal agencies, some nonprofits, community groups, tribal entities, and planning firms. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us today. We really hope that you're able to learn as much as you can and implement those lessons learned within your own brownfield redevelopment projects. Great. So to provide a bit of background on what you can expect to learn today, again, these are our speakers. They will all be speaking about various case studies and provide a foundation about the importance of capital stacks. Today's agenda will begin with me talking a bit about the importance of capital stacks within land reuse. And then I will pass it off to Tamar to provide foundational information regarding affordable housing sites and some sample redevelopments. This will be followed by 3 more case studies in which Leslie will talk about mixed-use affordable housing development that will also act as a cultural community center and a health services center. David will speak on how a decommissioned elementary school will become a green space and community oasis. And Doctors Barlow and Swain will share how they're transforming specific sites within a city for preparation for reuse. Each presenter will also end with some best practices or takeaways from their own redevelopment projects so that you are able to utilize those lessons learned for your own initiatives. And before I pass it off to our wonderful panelists, I'm just going to go over what capital stacks can mean within the realm of brownfield redevelopment. So to start off, I'm just going to go over what capital stacks can refer to. So they refer to the combination of funding sources. This funding can really come from grants, tax credits, loans, fee waivers, and in-kind services, and those are only just a few. There's a couple more listed on the slide, but it can really, the diverse funding sources are just in abundance. So this aspect of layering funding allows you to more easily deal with complex brownfield projects and deal with difficulties that may come up during the redevelopment phases because they can be so multifaceted. Capital stacks also provide a kind of flexibility in financing in which they're meant to be tailored to your specific needs within a reuse project. They help match certain funding resources within various stages of your redevelopment project. On this slide, I've also linked EPA's resource roadmap, which is a great resource to learn about what is involved during the redevelopment process, how to estimate costs for each component, and can show how matching fund commitments will be met. Overall, it's a very, very helpful document to reference to build out your own revitalization plan and keep it updated as you continue to hit milestones and make progress in your project. And just to summarize before going into the rest of the presentation, building out a capital stack and layering funding enables brownfield practitioners to adjust financing strategies as a project develops. Your needs may change and evolve, and this capital stack can help ensure smoother progress and successful revitalization of your contaminated site. Okay, now let's really get started. I will now be passing it off to Tamar Saunders, who is the senior project developer at Eden Housing. I'll let her introduce herself. Take it away, Tamar.
Thanks, Lujane. Hi, my name is Tamar. As Lujane said, I'm the senior project developer at Eden Housing. Have been here almost 4 years and have had the delight for working on several projects that were either termed a brownfield or encountered some type of environmental conditions. And so I'll be talking about that and how we were able to get that funded. Just a little bit about Eden. We've been around for about 55 years. We have more than 165 properties within California, and we're fully integrated, vertically integrated. We have a real estate development team as well as property management and resident services. So when we're building these buildings, we're actually most of the time owning and keeping them and also operating them. So super important that, we make sure these sites are good to go for the long run. Most of our housing stock is in Northern California, and I'm actually based in Los Angeles. We have a small Southern California team as we're expanding our footprint down here, but we have some existing properties in LA County, in San Diego County, and I'm currently in pre-development, about to start construction on a project in Riverside. So to talk a little bit about the affordable housing framework, I really want to stress the importance, which folks probably already know, of public-private partnerships. They're really key to getting housing built, not only in general, but getting it built faster or just more conveniently. We'll be involved anywhere from just like policy implementation, how to put inclusionary housing ordinances or provisions within the code. And, you see that a lot of times manifested with symposiums and kind of feedback talks and discussions with various folks in local government. And it does sometimes involve, all levels of government, and this can take shape in a variety of forms. I know for me, I'm working on a project that the state owns, and this is to basically further push their prerogative of having more affordable housing or mixed income housing on these excess sites that are owned by the state, and working with them closely on achieving that goal. You also can be working with the city, especially when you're dealing with entitlements. And I have another example of that, how we basically partnered with a private corporation to share the land to have affordable housing as well as a life sciences building on the same parcel. And of course, funding, as I'll get into, a lot of our capital stack is made up of all different levels of government, including federal, state, local money, and also just private from the lender and investor side. The three legs of affordable housing finance, a large chunk of that is low income housing tax credits, also known as LIHTC. And then we also, like I mentioned before, kind of just work with your everyday banks that you bank with, such as Citibank, Chase, that usually do the construction debt as well as the perm loan debt on the building. And a lot of that, in order to get access to any of the other two, we really rely on just public subsidy at the local level. And mostly that can be in the form of Project 8 vouchers, project-based Section 8 vouchers, and also just home and CDBG funding, which is a HUD federal source filtered through the local government. There's a pie chart kind of just breaking down, as I mentioned before, LIHTC is almost a third of the capital stack. And we'll get into how specifically from my experience, how that has been used for a lot of the environmental remediation and also kind of structural implementation that we do into the building. And we use that to basically fund it and address it. And 20% is state. If you've heard of HCD has a lot of funding sources that, especially if you're working in affordable housing, that we tap into and use. And then there's also local funding, at the city and county level. Foundations I think are becoming more popular. They can be a little bit expensive, but they definitely are super helpful for gap financing, especially going into a closing. And then perm loans and things like that from private banks and whatnot. So just brownfield financing, what I've known and seen and talked to my colleagues about, folks have mentioned DTSC and EPA assessment grants that they've been working on. I haven't personally had any experience with that, but with low-income housing tax credits, when you do apply, there is a section to have a basis boost or basically allow you to have access to more credits because of known environmental conditions and you have to address them. Now, I do want to preface and say that the 2 times I've used this boost, it has not been asking for a $30 million, tax credit basis boost to address the issue going on site. I'm not even sure if it would pencil out if that was the case. But I think on average, it's been anywhere from $250,000 to $300,000 ask for that. And that's mostly to address any kind of light remediation. A lot of the stuff we deal with is like soil vapor, and then the implementation installation cost, which is like a vapor intrusion mitigation system, which is kind of the popular vehicle to address that. And so that is what, to pay for that and bankroll that portion of addressing the environmental conditions, we've been just going through LIHTC to do that. To talk about a typical development timeline, and I'll show how that factors in with one of my sites. It can go anywhere from 3 to 5 years. A lot of the variable, components of the timeline is just entitlements. You probably heard of CEQA. There's a lot of kind of, sometimes nowadays, there's notices of exemption, so you don't have to be involved in CEQA and things of that nature. And some sites are just by right, so it cuts down on the entitlement period a lot. But one site I'll talk about was basically entitlements for 10 years. And then once you get that over with, the path from getting your permits issued to starting and finishing construction is usually less than 3 years. And that's ideal, right? And so with one of my projects, this is one that was in development for almost 10 years. It was 3 project developers like myself had worked on it. And it was mostly because if you see this building right next door, which is the owner of actually the entire parcel, the site was previously a PG&E gas plant, and it had to be remediated. And the remediation took a long time, and it was pretty expensive. And that was not something that Eden Housing was involved in. This was just happening because the owner of the site wanted to build something. So I'm not familiar with how they paid for it. It could have been just their own money. They could have used money from grants and whatnot. But we had to wait for that to be remediated. And once that happened, this is where kind of the private-public partnership aspect comes in. We worked with the city and the landowner, and a portion of the site was carved out for affordable housing. And so at that point, we weren't done there. We had to address kind of just the regulatory oversight, right? And I know that can be the California Air Resources Board, it can be at the county level, it can be at the DTSC level. And so, of course, that comes with cost. The recommended design changes we did, which included the VIMs, also came at an added cost. And as I said before, we covered that with just the basis boost with the tax credit financing. And our capital stack for that one was local county money, city money as well through their housing trust, and then a private housing trust foundation that we used, as well as 9% tax credits and private equity and debt from a bank. My other project in Riverside is not similar to the project in San Rafael, but there were environmental conditions we found out after the fact. And again, nothing major. It's becoming kind of typical on a lot of sites now. And it just required us, it is going to require us to do a little bit of remediation and then also put in a vapor intrusion mitigation system. And so again, we're financing that through the 9% tax credits as a basis boost to cover that cost, as well as all the other soft costs that go into that kind of environmental review, working with DTSC. So it was able to cover that cost for us to get this project under construction very soon. And then we also, other financing sources included the California Energy Commission build grants, state financing such as IIG, ASIC, vouchers, county and city funds. And I guess my takeaways on just developing brownfields in general, or sites that have known and unknown environmental conditions, I definitely think it's becoming standard practice for us to onboard an environmental consultant, even on a retainer, a T&M basis, or just having them review reports. A lot of folks think, oh, I just need a phase 1 and phase 2 and we're done. But actually have a third party review that phase 1 and phase 2, because they can catch things that maybe are not caught by the folks who put the reports together. And they might recommend additional testing on top of the testing that was already recommended, and recommending that they look at this set of data on top of the data they already collected, which is super important, and it has proved to actually be very valuable to where we had to change the direction of our design. So that's kind of number one. Number two kind of ties in increasing your contingencies, and a lot of folks think you need to do that for pre-development. I also would factor that in the actual construction timeline as well, because you don't really know what's in there until you start digging around and you're in the ground. And you want to have something set aside to address whatever the issues are, especially if you're going to have any construction delays and you have to pay on that time and money used. And then also leveraging any type of brownfield funding sources. Again, not too familiar with them because I never actually ended up applying, such as EPA and DTSC, but I do know folks within Eden who have done that, as well as, of course, utilizing the basis boost and tax credits. So hope that is helpful, and I'm going to pass it on to the next speaker.
Hi, everybody. My name is Leslie Pellerone with Satellite Affordable Housing Associates. I'm really excited to speak to you all, and I'm really excited to present this project. It's been in pre-development for, I want to say 8 years at this point, and we started construction earlier this month. We had closed the financing in February. So I'm going to present on 3050 International. It's a mixed-use housing and Native American cultural center and health center. So just about my organization, SAHA. So similar to Tamar's organization, Eden, we're an affordable housing developer, but we're mostly rooted in Oakland and Berkeley. We do some developments in Contra Costa County, Sonoma, Napa, starting to get into Santa Clara. But a lot of our buildings are in Oakland and Berkeley. We have over 50 years of experience in affordable housing, which has resulted in housing for over 4,000 families, senior special needs households. And we have over 65 housing developments. We do have an in-house resident services department that provides service coordinators, case management for our homeless units and community partnerships. We also have an in-house property management department. So we do have property managers on site at our building. So we partnered with Native American Health Center. They are a federally qualified healthcare organization based in Fruitvale, which I'll talk about more. They've been around since 1972, and they were mostly created in response to the urban Native Americans that were relocated to urban areas such as Oakland and San Francisco, and they provide healthcare, holistic healthcare, so medical, dental, behavioral health, social programs through their community wellness department and their partnerships with Oakland Unified School District. So they have been around for a very, very long time, and they decided they wanted to build affordable housing. They needed a partner. They were finding a lot of their patients needed affordable housing on top of their medical care. That was becoming, as you guys know, it's a big need in California. So this is a map of Fruitvale, which is a neighborhood in Oakland. It's a really, really diverse neighborhood. A lot of immigrants live here, a big Latinx population. It's close to the Fruitvale BART. And Native American Health Center, since they've been in the area for such a long time, what you see in the yellow are their existing buildings where they have their services. But in the middle, you'll see 3050 International in red, and that was a vacant site owned by the city of Oakland. So Native American Health Center advocated for that site to become affordable housing and this health center that I'll present on. So the big vision is to not only address mental health, healthcare, case management, their dental for the community, they wanted to provide affordable housing. So they partnered with us, and our vision for the development was to create a mixed-use development for families because there is a lot of overcrowding in the Fruitvale neighborhood and in Oakland. The development, they wanted to reflect the Native community in Fruitvale, address the lack of affordable housing, and provide, like I said, access to healthcare, social, and dental services. I will say too, they were having a lot of patients that needed dental care. They were getting thousands of patients on the wait list, and they only had at that time about, I want to say 20 operatories. So this development was an opportunity for them to also expand their services so they have higher efficiency in providing dental care for the neighborhood. So when we worked with our architect, with our vision, and with the site, we came up with this programming and amenities. So Native American Health Center really wanted to focus on expanding their dental, because like I said, they had a need. At first, we wanted to do a women's health clinic, but there was just such a need for dental. They also wanted a cultural community center. They had a small gathering space at one of the buildings, but it wasn't big enough for the community, an all staff space, and medical admin offices. And then for the housing component, we decided on 76 units for families that are extremely to very low income. And then 31 of those 76 units would be for homeless households. And with the units, we do provide amenities such as a community room, computer station, services, offices, a play structure because it is for families, and then the property managers. So this development is kind of, I will say, to be honest, a little bit nuts on the capital stacks, because there are two owners, because this is a mixed use development. We had to subdivide this one building into two air rights parcels because we were pursuing two capital stacks or financing structures. The Native American Health Center was pursuing new market tax credits, and then Saha, we were pursuing low income housing tax credits, which Tamar had talked about earlier. I'll talk about more of the new market tax credit financing later. Because there are two separate capital stacks, we still needed to close construction financing at the same time because we have two separate investors. And we also we're splitting pre-development costs. So that 85-15% allocation between the two of us was based off of the square footage of the parcel. So 85% went to Saha, and then 15% went to Native American in terms of pre-development costs. But as we get into the actual hard costs, 100% is attributable of housing is going to Saha, and then the other 100% is going to Native American Health Center. So whatever is in the Native American Health Center space, they're paying for it, and then we're paying for the housing component. But for shared costs like the podium and the vapor mitigation and the remediation, we had to coordinate how we were going to split those costs, and it usually fell within the 85-15 split. Like I said, we had to do separate parcels because of the financing. So we had to coordinate on the shared infrastructure, as I mentioned. Because we have shared infrastructure, we had to create joint operating reserves. So basically a reserve for whenever something happens to, I don't know, the podium, we have to put money into this reserve and then agree on how to spend it to maintain shared components of the building. And then we have a reciprocal easement agreement to just talk about how we're going to divide maintenance for this same building. Like I said, since we are separate owners in one building, and separate investors and separate construction lenders, we had to have an intercreditor agreement, which basically talks about what happens if somebody were to default on a portion of their building, like who would keep the building going. I will say, like, the one thing that if you're pursuing something like this, a joint development agreement or an MOU between your partner is a good thing. It's basically your roadmap on who is doing what, who is responsible for what tasks during this whole development process, what will happen operations. And that really became like our foundation, our guide for pre-development and developing this project, because it's easy to like point fingers or try to assume like somebody's doing something, but it was really helpful to have a guideline. And then we also had a construction management agreement because, like I said, we have two construction lenders, but we also had different obligations on how we're going to disperse funds to our general contractor. Let me keep going. So this is I'll go talk about this a little bit. Like I said, this is our organizational structure for the entire building. So at the top, the joint development agreement was basically our basis for every decision making that we're doing. Then it splits off into Saha Native American Health Center. We did have this whole building is under a ground lease with the city. So we have separate agreements with the city or ground leases with the city. And then it breaks off into the entities that will own the housing and the health clinic. So in terms of affordable housing timing, we first had to get our local fundings because that makes us competitive for our state financing. And we got, I want to say 4 grants or loans from the state. A lot of it came from HCD, and it was from their infill infrastructure grant and their No Place Like Home program. We did get a massive grant from Senator Skinner, and that was because of a lot of advocacy from Native American Health Center. And we did garner DTSC money. A lot of sites in Oakland need some remediation, and our site in particular had lead vapor. We had to install a vapor mitigation system, and the DTSC was really helpful in terms of paying for all of those costs. We were able to get 1.6 million to pay for environmental reports, actual system itself, monitoring. So that freed up a lot of other financing that we could put into our programs and our capital costs for the building. After we got our state financing, then we applied for low income housing tax credits through TCAC and SIDLAC. We got an allocation, and then within 100 days of getting an allocation, we selected BMO as our construction lender, and I think we're one of the first projects, West Coast projects, to get construction loan from them. And then Raymond James is our tax credit investor. So this is an example of our capital stack. It was a lot of the delay, or the 6 years of pre-development, 6 or 8 years of pre-development, was basically because we had to garner a lot of financing from all of these entities. Usually in affordable housing development, you're always trying to get your funding to match up with your design, but oftentimes funding is delayed due to how often these organizations release NOFAs and how competitive you are as a developer. So that is a rendering of the housing entrance, lobby, hallways, units, the community room. We have a big community gardening program, and I know Native American Health Center is going to provide programming for their urban pharmacy. Overview of our outdoor space, and then here's a rendering of the building from International. So the other financing that Native American Health Center was getting was called New Market Tax Credits, which is different from low income housing tax credits, but similar function where an investor comes in and buys the tax credits to provide equity for your project. So if you want to pursue this, it's primarily for projects that are located in low income neighborhoods or communities to attract capital by providing a tax credit. It's used to finance businesses, but not all businesses. There is a list of businesses that you can't use the New Market Tax Credit on. So the way that it works is that a community development finance institution, usually the Treasury, allocates tax credits to community development entities called CDEs through a competitive application. And then these CDEs use their authority to offer tax credits to investors in exchange for equity in the CDE. Then the CDE can make loans and investments to businesses like Native American Health Center on better rates and terms. So, and in exchange for investing in the CDEs, the investor can claim a tax credit. So that's just like a very simplified version of New Markets. This is Native American Health Center's sources. Capital Impact Partners is a CDE, and they provided construction financing. Broad Street Impact Services is the investor. Native also got money from Senator Skinner, the city of Oakland, and a portion of the DTSC money that we got went to them as well because they are a owner of the site. So this is like a more graphic version of how New Markets works. The CDFI provides allocation of new markets to the CDE. In this case, it was Capital Impact Partners and a Community Hospitality Healthcare Services. And if you're a business or a nonprofit like Native American Health Center, the way that this works, you're really talking to these CDEs to see if they have an allocation that they could provide to your project. And the CDE does most of the work in terms of getting the allocation, getting the investor involved. So you're basically selling your project to the CDEs, and you just hope that they pick you as part of their allocation from the CDFI. This is example of what Native is going to do with their financing. This is a rendering of their entry lobby. This is their waiting area for their dental clinic, which is left of the entry lobby. And then right of the entry lobby is their big community center where they're going to do all their programs. And this is a rendering of their side of the building. They're more towards the other side. They have their own parking garage. And then a big rendering of the entire building. So in terms of stacking all of this financing together, it's a lot of work. I will be honest that it was really helpful to have attorneys that were understood both structures. You try to also have the same construction GC, the same, try to have as many of the same consultants as you can, because it does create efficiencies. If you're gonna do both low income housing tax credit and new market tax credits, because it is really a lot of work. It took us about 6 months to close the construction financing, because there's just so many joint agreements between all of the 30 some lenders and investors, and even with Native American Health Center. But despite all of that, there was big community impact for this project. Like I said, it's providing affordable housing, doubling the amount of visits from new clients to the health center. It's a 300-person capacity cultural center. We're providing jobs, and we have an owner goal too of trying to create more opportunities for Native American workers on the jobs. We're working with our GC to outreach to Native American suppliers and workers and subs. We do have community-driven artwork from Civic Design Studio, which is an Oakland-based artist. And in terms of sustainability and environmental impact, we're close to Fruitvale Bar. There's a AC Transit bus line right on top in front of us. There's bike storage. It's an all-electric building, bike parking, community garden. And really the big thing is, like I said, the DTSC money is helping us out with remediation of lead and vapor soil. So that is it for my slides. I'll pass it over to David Diaz.
Thank you, Leslie, and good morning, folks. My name is David Diaz. I'm the Executive Director of Active San Gabriel Valley. We are an environmental justice and public health nonprofit headquartered out of the city of El Monte. Our mission is to create a more sustainable, equitable, and livable San Gabriel Valley. For folks not familiar, we are in eastern Los Angeles County, which is comprised of 31 cities and 4 large unincorporated areas. The project that I'm going to be talking to you about today is going to be the Norwood Greening Project, which is a decommissioned school that's now going to be transformed into a public park space. This site was identified in multiple planning processes over the last 20 years as a potential opportunity to open it up to the public to be able to use it as a public park space. And so for us, one of the things that was key and critical for getting this project underway, in 2019, a partnership of funders that included the Resources for Legacy Fund, First 5 LA, the Rosalind and Arthur Gilbert Foundation awarded Active SGV and the Trust for Public Land a planning grant to be able to identify and work alongside the community to further open space opportunities within the city of El Monte. And so the Trust for Public Land is an organization that's nationwide, has a lot of expertise and capacity around open space and greening. Active SGV, we're a local community-based nonprofit organization out of the city of El Monte. And so the idea was to pair our respective expertises together to be able to develop, well, one is work with the community to identify and develop priorities, and then 2, to be able to coordinate and potentially implement projects. And so through that initiative, we were able to then come up with a community-based planning process that allowed us to work alongside the community to identify what were the needs, what were the priorities, what were the existing or previous planning efforts, and then to identify opportunities to increase the amount of green space within the city of El Monte. And so here on this slide, specifically for Norwood Elementary, you can see there's approximately 7,000 folks that live there. However, there's very little to no park space or access for them. There are no other green spaces within a half-mile radius. In the city of El Monte specifically, there are 0.41 acres per 1,000 residents of park space. We also suffer some of the highest pollution burden. And so we heard that over and over again from the community that that was a priority for them, is to have open space availability and to be able to use this kind of neighborhood school that's been decommissioned. And so here's an aerial shot of Norwood Elementary. As you can see, very little to no trees or other landscaping. There's a current softball fields or 2 softball fields that are available. There's a shared use agreement between the city and the school district for those softball fields to be used. But other than that, this space remains closed, or for now is closed to the public. And so through this iterative community engagement process, what we were able to do is work with the community to identify Norwood as a priority project for them, and then do a series of outreach and engagement activities that then led us to this design. One of the things that we're really focused on is maximizing resources, knowing that resources are limited. And so, this is a multiple benefit project in that we're not only increasing access to green space for recreational access, but there's also a large stormwater component as part of this. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the funding opportunities or some of the funding that was realized for this project. And so really want to be able to maximize the amount of benefits for this community, because we do have a lot of needs. And so we wouldn't have been able to do it without our partners for this project. The Almani City School District continues to be the land use authority for the project, for the project site. The city of Almani, as part of some of the funding, has agreed to do some of the off-street maintenance for some of the stormwater capture elements. And then, of course, we have the Trust for Public Land and Active SGV as partners here. So again, one of the things that we've seen in other communities happen are that decommissioned schools are being transformed into other, whether those are sold for luxury condo developments or warehouse distribution centers, or just closed for something else entirely, or not being used or tapped into. We really want to make sure that we work with our partners to be able to determine something that was going to meet a community need and provide benefits. And so with the funding that we were able to receive, again, through those various partners that came together, that was a relationship-based funding opportunity that came forward for us, building off of previous work that we had done. And then one of the grant opportunities that we were able to secure during this time was to the Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. And that was actually through a referral, and where we were made aware of that funding opportunity, and then were successful in receiving the dollars. And then in LA County, we have Measure W, or the Safe Clean Water Program, the stormwater program. Active SGV is very involved in this program. We sit on multiple committees, so we did the run-up in advocacy for the program and for the measure when it was being considered by voters, and then now we're actually on a few committees, and so we were aware of the nature of the program and the potential to provide additional funding for this project. And then the other thing I want to talk to you about is, in terms of why we chose these funding opportunities, one of the things is that that we looked at is the need to strengthen capacity within our community and to be able to do community-based planning. And those funding opportunities allow us to do that, especially the private philanthropy dollars, is that we want to initiate a community-based planning process, but also look kind of back to like previous outreach and engagement that have been done and honor that. Some of the things that came up for us is like community telling us, like, how many more times do we need to tell someone that parks and open space is a priority for us? And then again, I think with the funding opportunities, some of the things that we were looking at were the timing of it and the need to create multiple benefit projects in order to meet multiple needs. And this slide here, let's see. And so the key takeaways for us really are early and iterative planning. You need to have early engagement with the community, from project identification to developing solutions. So working alongside them every step of the way, on not just like the outreach part, but also the design, any potential solutions, challenges that may come up, even like funding opportunities, workforce development, those are really important. And then the other thing, because of the nature of how long it takes to develop capital infrastructure projects, is to be working on multiple funding opportunities concurrently. And so not limiting yourself to just, one or two funding opportunities, but be looking at multiple funding opportunities concurrently. So with the funding that we've received through the Measure W program, that's approximately $9.8 million. It's on a 5-year timeline. And so within the next 5 years, we'll be able to say that the Norwood Greening Project will come true. So from when we started in 2019 to approximately now 2029, it'll be a 10-year long process to develop a 6-acre park. But it's very much needed in the city of El Monte, and we're looking forward to seeing that come true. So with that, I'll pass it to Dr. Jessica Barlow.
Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Barlow. As mentioned, I'm a professor of sustainability at San Diego State University, and I work closely with Dr. Madison Swain, who's assistant professor of city planning at SDSU. You'll hear from her shortly. We both oversee the Center for Regional Sustainability at SDSU, which houses this Brownfields project that we're going to be talking about. The focus of this center is to collaborate with community partners, so local governments, non-governmental organizations, community members, to add capacity to local needs. And we focus in particular on addressing environmental justice needs. And so for our project, what we're going to be sharing is work at a much earlier stage of brownfields development, and that is at the level of community-wide assessment and reuse planning. And the community that we are working with is the city of National City and the National City community broadly, and which includes some nonprofit organizations as well as individual community leaders who are heavily involved in environmental justice work. National City is about 9 square miles. It's located directly south of downtown San Diego in San Diego County. It's got a really complicated history of incompatible land uses. For example, it was the site of the first transcontinental railroad, which led to the establishment of a lot of large-scale industry. Currently is adjacent to a lot of port industry and adjacent to a naval base as well. It has a population of about 60,000 residents, highly dense, really can only build up rather than out. It's flanked by freeways, including a stretch, that stretch to the U.S.-Mexico border at San Isidro, which is the largest and busiest land border, or the busiest land border crossing in at least the Western Hemisphere. And all of these things contribute to a very high pollution burden for the community. And although it's a coastal city, residents of National City have access to only a sliver of the coast through the Sweetwater Channel. I'm going to try and draw that here. This is where people can access the coast. That is it. And it's through a channel, not even into the bay. So the community itself is primarily Hispanic, about 60% of the community, but there's also a large Filipino population at about 20%. Also, about 20% of the residents live in poverty. So this is a community that has truly faced decades of environmental racism due to these prior incompatible land uses. There's also, at the same time, or because of this, I should say, a very large group of highly engaged activist community members who are dedicated to participating in community decision-making, voicing their concerns and their needs. For this work, when we'll talk about the grants that we received for the work shortly. Let me delete that little mark there. In order to do this work, we did have to apply for the funding to do this work. We had to identify 4 priority or pre-selected sites that we knew we would have access to, that were already identified as being potentially contaminated because of past use or past use of adjacent sites. 3 of these 4 sites are in the city's downtown specific plan area, and the 4th is just outside of it, adjacent to a park that itself was a former brownfield. So these are sites that we started with for environmental assessment and reuse planning, but we're also identifying additional sites, and you'll hear more about that process from Maddie. These sites were selected specifically because they are part of this planning area that we're focusing on, but also because they are owned by the city and we knew we would be able to be granted access to them. Now, you might be wondering why SDSU? That is, why is a university taking the lead on this work, and why National City? And this really is due in part to the fact that we have had over 10 years of collaboration with the city government and local community organizations in National City. This has been started through our SAGE project, which is a program at the university where we get university faculty in their courses, so entire classes of students connected with projects in the community with the goal of adding capacity to those existing community needs and goals. And so these are community-led initiatives, to be clear. We don't presume to know what the community needs. Instead, we always approach it as a question: how can we help? How can we add capacity to your high priority projects? And we've been working with National City for 10 years, doing just that, all the while working very hard to build relationships, build and maintain those relationships, build and maintain trust, show up, listen as much as we possibly can. And at some point, we realized that addressing brownfields in National City was a huge need, and it would benefit everyone involved. And since especially smaller city governments and nonprofits often lack some of the capacity needed to apply for and manage large grants, we took the lead on the Brownfields grant applications, taking advantage of the fact that San Diego State has an entire auxiliary unit dedicated to grant development and management. So when we began applying for grants, we didn't necessarily have in mind that we would be stacking our funding, but we did know that we would be leveraging university resources for this work. So we applied for a community-wide assessment grant from the US EPA, and we also applied for a community-wide assessment grant through the California Department of Toxic Substance Control's Equitable Community Revitalization Grant Program, and really in hopes that we just get one of them. We were really thrilled to learn that we actually got both, and they came in around the same time. And so that really allowed us to scale up the work beyond the initial scope, especially in the area of community engagement, which is something that Maddie and I are particularly passionate about. And so we're leveraging both of these grants to address a real and huge need in National City. We're also leveraging operational funds from the SDSU SAGE project by engaging a lot of faculty experts in their classes on some of this work, particularly with respect to community engagement. And not to mention, we are leveraging staff time from the city and from our community partners, as well as the time of the faculty and students who are participating in the work. And an important component of this work is that we have representatives from the community or who work to address specific needs in the community in National City. And so we formed a Brownfield Advisory Committee. We meet monthly or bi-monthly and provide updates about the work and also progress on the grants, I should say, but more importantly, we don't make any decisions about the work without their support and approval. So the committee members include Maddie and me from the university, as well as Carlos Aguirre, who is the Director of Community Development for the City of National City. We have Janet Barragan from the County of San Diego Office of Sustainable and Equitable Communities, Jim O'Callahan from the South County Economic Development Council, Chris Clark and Tatiana Perez from the Urban Land Institute, and the Montserrat Hernandez from the Environmental Health Coalition. So we have MOUs, agreements or subawards with each of these organizations, but we also have informal partnerships and collaborations with a number of other community organizations in National City, as well as some of the community leaders that are heavily engaged in this work. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Maddie to talk more about our process in this work.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Maddie Swain. Like Jessica mentioned, I'm an assistant professor of city planning here at San Diego State University. and also work with Jessica as Associate Director for the Center for Regional Sustainability. So I see we're a little bit short on time, and I want to make sure that everybody gets the chance to do Q&A. So I might go a little bit quickly through some of this, but I'm happy to sort of elaborate on any of it during the Q&A period. So like Jessica mentioned, we have these 2 grants, one from the EPA and one from the DTSC to do community-wide brownfields assessment in National City. And this slide is just showing you an overview of the 4 primary activities we're undertaking as part of this work. So the first is brownfield site identification. So there has been previous work in National City that's been funded by grants and other sources of capital to do brownfields remediation and redevelopment. But for this scope, we are trying to develop the most comprehensive list or inventory of brownfield sites in National City. We're doing this through a handful of ways. Like Jessica mentioned, community engagement is very central to the work that we're doing. And so this brownfield site identification process includes engaging with residents and their expertise to understand what they know about brownfields in their communities and the locations of brownfields in their community, as well as looking at existing databases of environmental contamination and open investigations from agencies like, oh, did I change the slide? Okay, agencies like the DTSC and the water boards. Our second set of activities is related to site prioritization. So while we do have 2 grants and we're lucky to be able to do more work than we originally thought we would be able to do in National City, there are still more brownfields in National City than we are able to do environmental assessments on. So we've been working with the community on developing the criteria that they believe are most important for site prioritization. With our prioritized list of brownfield sites, we will then perform environmental assessments, so phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments at those high priority brownfield sites. And then finally, these are assessment grants, so we can sort of do everything up to putting a shovel into the dirt and doing development. So we're coordinating future site plans and doing reuse planning for the brownfields in National City. So this is just sort of where we are in the process. We are pretty close to wrapping up year 2 and moving into year 3. We've begun environmental site assessments just recently and are sort of wrapping up the site prioritization process. A little bit more about our community engagement and outreach. This is something that we've worked really hard on, and I think we're pretty proud of our community engagement efforts related to these grants. We've done a variety of different things. So we have developed a community engagement plan and fact sheet. As Jessica mentioned, National City is a multilingual community with English, Spanish, and Tagalog being primary languages spoken in the community. And so we have developed these fact sheets in all 3 languages that provide information to the community on, you know, a very simple question: what is a brownfield and why should I care? But also an overview of the activities that we're undertaking as part of these grants. And the fact sheet also provides opportunities for residents to learn more about how to get involved. We maintain a website, newsletter, social media sites, and we also develop flyers related to all ongoing activities. Again, these communication materials are translated into the 3 primary languages in National City. We've also held and will continue to hold participatory community events where we provide not just updates on how the project is going, but we really like to center these events so that members of the community can provide meaningful input on the work that we're doing. So like I mentioned, we're developing that community-wide inventory of brownfields in National City. And so one of the community events that we held, we actually printed out large-scale maps of the city of National City and gave people stickers, had them sort of walk around the room and nominate places in their neighborhoods as brownfields for us to take a deeper look at in the inventory development process. And so we've actually gathered a whole bunch of information on these community nominated sites, as well as sites that we're seeing show up in some of those more sort of traditional secondary data sources on environmental contamination. We're also just, it is a little bit funky that a university is doing this work, but I think it's also a very cool opportunity because we do have the ability to show up in community, attend city council meetings, attend other, community social events that are going on to continue to engage folks in this work. I already mentioned the translation of our materials into the various languages. And really, we're just trying to show up everywhere and as much as possible and listen and get engaged. And with all of this, we hope that we're sort of setting the groundwork for future brownfields reuse and specific project type work, like what we heard about in some of the previous presentations earlier today. I'll end here by just, providing you with information on how to reach out to us. There's links to our website, email address, Facebook, and Instagram. And thank you, and I will turn it back to Lou Jane.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Maddie, and to all the presenters. Those were such wonderful presentations, and I can't wait to hear how your redevelopment project begins to progress and really come to life. So now we'll go into the Q&A portion. I see there are already some questions in the chat. I'll just ask all of the panelists to come on camera, to turn on the cameras, and then we'll get started. So I see that there were already some that were answered. Perfect. Leslie had a question. Leslie was asked a question about how do you handle unhoused individuals with pets? Leslie mentioned that they allow certain pets and they don't turn people away because of pets. And then another individual asked, because the city is landowner and the grantees are leasing, would the Saha project have been eligible for EPA assessment or cleanup grants? And Leslie said yes, they looked into those grants and they were eligible. And then this last question was both for Saha and Eden. Leslie provided her answer, and Tamar, I want to give you the opportunity to answer as well. So the question is, did Eden have any separate or additional funding for community engagement / planning? And what was the engagement with the community and how was that funded?
Yeah, so for the San Rafael Marin County project, I actually came in right like a year before we started construction. So I'm not sure what the community engagement process was like, but there was a lot. You can probably tell that by a 10-year entitlements timeline. The funding for that, I think we all covered just with our pre-development sources, and we actually had to apply for additional sources to cover that. Like when we went into closing, we were covering costs from back in 2012. So that's something that we had to just plan for. For the Riverside, that community engagement process has been, it's been kind of twofold. There's one where we were basically putting together just kind of community infrastructure improvements and kind of getting feedback from the community and what they like to see, whether it's green space or bicycle lanes. And that we also funded, but that was also tied to some state funding we were applying to. For the actual environmental side, that is being run through DTSC. They have a public participation rep. And that's also included with what's being billed to us. So at the end of the day, all the funding that we apply for is going to pay that back. But you do have to put up the upfront cost usually, and I'm not sure if there's any financing that's out there to pay for the pre-development side outside of pre-development loans from like Century or List or something.
Great, thank you, Tamar. So the next question, which I think that each speaker can kind of touch upon, grassroots organizations don't have the capacity that nonprofit developers or universities have. Where can they start? Anyone feel free to hop in.
We can take a stab at that one, unless Jessica, I saw you unmute at the same time.
Go ahead, Maddie.
Okay, so I mean, one option would be to, there are similar centers to ours. So opportunities for partnership with centers like us do exist. And then there's also I'm gonna get the acronym wrong, CCEEJ. Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about CJ?
Yeah, sure. So and actually CCLAIR is involved with this organization as well. There are these technical assistance centers around the country now assigned to each region of the EPA that are actually dedicated to providing this kind of technical assistance in grant writing and finding grants and like learning how to navigate the grant application process that takes away some of that burden that's associated with trying to figure all that out. So there's one house here at San Diego State University. I can put the link in the chat in just a second, but there are also in other regions of the EPA as well. Thank you, Maddie, for doing that. So that would be another way to kind of add capacity, to help add capacity or lessen the burden of applying for those kinds of grants.
Great, thank you, Jessica and Maddie. Would anyone like to add anything, Leslie or David? If not, we can definitely move on to the next question. Okay, great. So what kind of brownfields TA did the speakers access, if any? So did anyone access technical assistance resources from their TA providers?
CSU did. It was our first time applying for the EPA Brownfields grants, and so we actually reached out to CCLAIR to review our grant application prior to filing it, and those reviews were incredibly helpful for helping us sort of tailor that narrative and I think make it a successful grant narrative.
Thank you for the shout out, Maddie. And we actually have a Calendly available for TA intake. So if anyone is interested in continuing these types of conversations more, I'll put the Calendly link in the chat, or one of my colleagues will, before the end of this webinar. Okay, so someone asked, what funds are your NGOs able to use for early project development?
I can give an example. One of the things through our partnership, we have the Brownfield Advisory Committee that we mentioned, and we were able to provide some subawards to some of the non NGOs that we are partnered with, and so that they could use in the way that helped, that we're at least in line with the goals of our project, but it was also a way to allow them to have funds to do the work that they need to do. Interestingly, not all of them took advantage of that, and I think in part because it being a capacity issue, but we wanted to be sure to make that a possibility for the organizations that we're working with.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jessica. And then Josh asked a great question. It's a general question. They mentioned that their new TRP coordinator who has a project for their community, and I noticed that planning has lots to do with preparing a plan. So they've been learning about project planning for the past couple of months. Are they going on the right path besides funding for this project? What advice would you all give me moving forward? So I can just do a brief little answer on that. We mentioned earlier about the EPA resource roadmap that really takes you through step by step in regards to funding and also understanding the different needs within a brownfield redevelopment process. I can definitely relink it just so you have that saved. But yeah, I would definitely start there if you haven't already. And I'll also allow the rest of the presenters to expand on any answers. I'd love to hear a little bit of advice from all of the speakers if they could. So yeah, Tamar, would you like to start?
I think definitely kind of what I mentioned in the takeaways and just advice going forward. Just adequately planning to have enough buffer If there's deadlines you have to meet, that's either associated with financing or anything else, like just being realistic about just a lot of the unknowns. If it is known, that's great, but then, there's a lot of the regulatory process that can sometimes be variable in terms of how much time it takes. So just being realistic about that and conveying those to all the stakeholders involved with your project, as well as financing, kind of looking at the pipeline of funding. I won't say it's pretty easy, but sometimes they have projections for like the next couple of years to see what's coming down the line, or if even financing will be available then. So it's not something that you're relying on possibly getting in year 2 or year 3. And lastly, just having an environmental consultant on board, especially if you're not an expert in this field.
Great, thank you. Leslie, would you like to provide any advice moving forward?
I say, just be very clear with what your goals are, as well as what type of programming you can get. And then after you determine what your priorities are, then try to just, I don't know, we got really, it got really, not bad, but kind of disheartening during the pre-development process because it took so long. But we definitely relied on a lot of community partnerships and talking to people to try to figure out what funding is available. So rely on your networks to try to find funding. And then also rely a lot on your consultants for help.
Great, thank you, Leslie. This is definitely more of a teamwork and a collaboration. That's a really important aspect of this process. David, would you like to provide any advice moving forward?
Can you give me the question again?
Yeah, definitely. So Josh just kind of wants to know if he's going on the right path besides funding for this project. He's been learning about project planning for the past couple of months. What advice would you be able to give him moving forward?
I think just recognizing early on the power of partnerships, and not needing to do everything yourself, and being able to seek out those other partners that can help kind of fill in the gaps and strengthen, the work. So just recognizing you don't need to do it all yourself. I think I would advise you that.
Awesome. Great advice, David. Thank you. And then Jessica and Maddie.
I can start. Maybe Maddie will add on, or maybe we have the same brain. We often do. I think if you want to take community involvement and engagement seriously, plan for it to take longer, plan to slow down, plan that translation is more expensive than you thought. I think one of the things that I think has been so successful about our project so far is that the community is really starting to recognize that we're serious, that we really want to listen. We really are including what they are sharing. We care about what's happening and want to be as inclusive as possible and learn from them. And that's an ongoing hustle, though. It's a very time consuming, but extremely inspiring and rewarding process at the same time.
Definitely, yeah. Maddie, would you like to expand on that?
Jessica really summed it up.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you all to all the presenters for being able to provide their insight and advice. So we are at time, but we'll just take one more question. So have cleanup levels been an issue in your development projects? For example, not clean enough, and how did that affect your schedule and budget? So Leslie, Tamar, and David, feel free to take that question on.
I would say not for this project, but for our other Oakland projects that tend to have that tend to need environmental remediation. We oftentimes don't budget enough for it because when you're digging in the dirt, you don't know sometimes what to expect. So we've had to, throughout the years, the phase 1 or the environmental budgets have gotten really big, and we have to just accommodate that in our overall budget. But I will say just planning that out, being very conservative with the reports and timing on how long VIM's installation will take or excavation will take. From past projects we've learned, and we're able to apply that to 3050 International, where we have more time for ourselves and the contractor, and have accounted for that into our DTSC ask. So like I said in my presentation, the DTSC money has been like a huge help for us, because in the past we don't really account for any of that, but now we have a source for it.
Thank you, Leslie, for providing a little bit of context on that, and how you and how that happened in some of your various projects. So we are a little bit over time, and there was just one question that I want to emphasize, because it was important. Someone asked, which Claire answered. Someone asked, there seems to have been a lot of funding for EJ and climate change recently. How long will this last? There is a California budget deficit, so that's a really great point to add. Claire answered, and she said that it'll last about 3 years or shorter, so be sure to take advantage of it now. We've also linked the full picture of the EJ opportunities in the chat, or in the Q&A portion, in the Q&A box. That is a link to a webinar that we conducted 2 weeks ago, which deals with all the EJ opportunities and how you can take advantage of it now. So I will now close out the webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to all of their speakers for providing their expertise and their insight. I really hope you all enjoyed this presentation. And just as a reminder, this webinar has been recorded and will be available within a week in a follow-up email, as well as on the CClear website. Please be sure to fill out the evaluation survey that will pop up after this webinar ends. Thank you, everyone.